Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Herd and Horns for our final edition of X's and O's for this semester. We're here to talk about the NFL Draft. I'm Eric Bunnell, along with my co-host
Jay Lenander.
Jay. Let's get right into it. The Cleveland Browns, not the Cavaliers. Draft coming out, not basketball. Who are you going to take at number one? You have Miles. You have basically the free range of the draft. You have Josh Allen, Saquon Barkley, Bradley Chubb at NC State. I mean, you have a plethora of picks in the top four, but who's your pick for the Browns?
It's a real difficult situation for them, I think. When you look at all the factors, they're in such an interesting place. And it's not because they're number one overall, it's because they also have the number 4 pick. So there's a lot of mind games that are coming in right now. Personally, I think if they're not in love with a specific quarterback, or if they think they're all kind of equal, because that's the reason. Usually when you're picking number 1 overall, you kind of are a little bit less tightly lipped about who you're thinking about there. But because they're number 4, they have the 4th pick as well. They can't be afforded that liberty. So we don't really know what they're thinking right now. Because if they look at all these quarterbacks and they grade them all about the same, then the choice is pretty clear that at number 1 they have to go Saquon Barkley. Because Saquon Barkley, I mean, in terms of overall talent, is likely the most complete, ready-now player in the draft. There's been a very tight history over the past couple of years that if you draft that highly touted running back within the top 5 picks, then you're going to potentially make the playoffs within the next few years. We saw the Cowboys do it that year with Ezekiel Elliott. We've seen the Jaguars do it with Leonard Fournette. Saquon Barkley is that next big-time running back. He's that guy. And people have Saquon Barkley rated much higher than Ezekiel Elliott when Elliott was coming out of the draft. So I think Saquon Barkley, if you're picking number 1 simply based on talent alone, Saquon Barkley is the best player in the draft. But the Cleveland Browns need to get a quarterback. It is, with one of those 2 picks, it is a necessity.
Even though they just signed Tyrod Taylor?
Even though they just signed Tyrod Taylor.
He's a scramble quarterback.
And Tyrod Taylor, it could be their quarterback for the next 2-3 years. But the thing is that they're planning for the future. Whoever they get is not going to be playing this year. It's going to be someone who's behind Tyrod Taylor. And then whether it's next year or the year after that, depending on how Tyrod Taylor does for them, they're drafting their quarterback of the future to go along with Tyrod Taylor.
Oh, and you got to look at their weapons they have on offense. Josh Gordon, Corey Coleman, Jarvis Landry. They just inked him to a 5-year, $75 million extension, I believe it is.
Big-time deal.
Big-time deal. And their defense isn't that bad. They were ranked pretty high and holding some good teams to low scoring last year. So, I mean, they have plenty to work around with. It's just the quarterback play. They went through 21 quarterbacks in the past, I believe it was, 10 years?
Yeah, it's been insane.
So they lost the best offensive lineman in probably football ever, and Joe Thomas this summer did retirement. But now let's go on to the Giants. I'd say the Browns take Barkley. Who are the Giants taking at number 2?
It's another pick that's sort of shrouded in mystery right now because the Giants are sort of leveraging and completely reliant on whatever Cleveland does. If Cleveland takes a quarterback, one might have to think that Saquon Barkley becomes the pick for the Giants. Eli Manning's still around. He's on the decline for sure, but he still could be their quarterback. And we've seen with Pat Shurmur coming in as the head coach that things could change in terms of Eli Manning's play. They could get some extra life out of him, squeeze another year or 2 for them to find a quarterback later on in this draft or in next year's draft. Depending on what their gradings are like. They could go after a Mason Rudolph or a Kyle Lauletta in the top of the 2nd round. But in terms of this pick, if Saquon Barkley's gone, they are likely either going to trade back or, I don't know, pick a quarterback. Because no one really knows what the Giants are thinking. It seems to be, through the mock drafts that I've been seeing, that they're not quite as in love with Josh Rosen as some people might have thought. So it really depends. Do they think Josh Rosen's the guy? Do they think Sam Darnold's the guy? Do they think Baker Mayfield's the guy? It really depends on what their grades are on them. And I mean, even if Saquon Barkley is available at the 2nd pick, it comes down to they've done extensive research on all of these quarterbacks. Do they think one of them is their long-term future? If they don't think that guy is there, and either they don't think Saquon Barkley is that guy, or Saquon Barkley is no longer available, I think they'll trade back, because there are teams desperate for quarterbacks, and Buffalo's pretty close. Buffalo's got a lot of ammunition sitting there at 12 to move up to number 2. They could easily make that big of a trade with them. And if not Buffalo, it could easily be some other team that's even further back down the line, like Arizona. Arizona could easily move up all the way to number 2. It's just they'd be giving up a huge package for it. So that's really the thing, is if the Giants aren't 100% certain on what they want at that number 2 pick, it's very likely that they'll trade back.
It's interesting you brought up Baker Mayfield. Today, a report came out according to ESPN's Adam Schefter. Baker Mayfield has been linked to the Cleveland Browns now at that number 1 overall pick. I know they can get him at 4.
Yep.
There's no way. I don't think the Giants are going to take him. If Barkley's there, Barkley's their guy. Otherwise, he could. Otherwise, I think they take Bradley Chubb out of NC State. I think he's good enough where he can provide that edge rush for that Giants defense that they desperately need. I know their defense is kind of lacked, and they got some high-powered teams in the NFC East to face, and the Eagles and the Cowboys. And I mean, now the Redskins not really used to be kind of with Kirk Cousins there, but now he went to Minnesota. But I think for the 4th pick, if that happens, if it's not Josh Allen, if it's Saquon Barkley and the Giants pick somebody else, I think for the Jets, based just looking at mock drafts I've seen, I think they're going to fall in love with Josh Rosen at that number 3 pick. Number 4, Cleveland, you don't know who they're going to take. To me, it's a crapshoot. I mean, who they could take. They could probably take, if Bradley Chubb's still there, if I'm their owner, I'm running to the table, I'm giving them, we want Bradley Chubb right now. But the number 5, you brought it up with Buffalo. Denver could trade back.
I think Denver's got a lot of options. One option that I was about to sort of throw in there when you're talking about the Giants is if the Giants want Bradley Chubb, if that's their guy, what the Giants would likely do is work out a deal with Denver. Because Denver, if they were to trade up, it would likely to be to get their quarterback behind Case Keenum. Or Saquon Barkley, because they also very much need a running back. So Denver would likely be willing to give up some goods to move up those 3 spots if the Giants want to do that. And so if the Giants want Bradley Chubb, I don't think they take him at 2. I think they take him at 5. And like you said, if all the quarterbacks are gone by the time it gets to 5, and Saquon Barkley's gone, and they're not in love with Bradley Chubb, then I think that's when Denver would likely try and move back for someone who maybe is a little bit lower down the list, who wants, say, a Quentin Nelson or Bradley Chubb. The problem, you mentioned Cleveland potentially taking Bradley Chubb at 4. The reports that I've seen in terms of sort of saying why that's not going to happen, because that would be really scary with Myles Garrett and Bradley Chubb. Yeah, because I think Bradley Chubb is highly underrated. He is scary and fun to watch. Yeah. But the thing is that the argument I've seen for not Cleveland staying away from Bradley Chubb is because in like 4 or 5 years, it would create an absolute cap nightmare, because they'd have 2 defensive ends, 2 players at the same position that would be probably getting $100 million contracts, as well as whatever quarterback they end up taking. So just because they wouldn't be able to diversify that as much, that it might be, if Saquon Barkley's gone at 4, it might make sense to trade down at 4 and then take like a Mike McGlinchey as your offensive tackle replacement for Joe Thomas at, say, 12 if you trade back with Buffalo. So then that would be an extra way to get some extra picks. I think the big thing holding all of these picks together, 1 through 5, is really which team likes which quarterback. Because I think that's really the part that no one really knows what's going on, and I think there's a lot of smoke and shadows being thrown around. Because I've seen the Jets tied to Baker Mayfield. I've seen them tied to Josh Rosen. I've seen them tied to Josh Allen. I've seen them tied to Sam Darnold. I've seen almost every team tied to every player except for Cleveland and Josh Rosen, because Josh Rosen has said he really doesn't want to play in Cleveland. So I think that's really, out of all of the teams kind of fighting for quarterbacks, I think that's really the only pair that doesn't happen, is Josh Rosen to Cleveland. Everything else, we don't really know who the preference is, because clearly after everyone spent spends so much time looking at these quarterbacks in pro days, inviting them to combines, in interviewing them extensively over and over again, having all of these meetings, there's clearly, there has to be someone that they like more than everyone else. For each team, that there's probably someone who's at the top of the pile. The difference is how close to that top quarterback is everyone else. You just don't know, because, and I think that's really what will dictate Cleveland's decision at number 1, is if they think everyone's really close, there's no way they should take a quarterback at number 1. Because if they don't think there's one that stands out from the rest of them, there's no reason to take a quarterback and then risk not getting Saquon Barkley at 4. You just take Saquon Barkley, and then there's literally no physical way that one of those 3 quarterbacks, Josh Allen, Sam Darnold, and Baker Mayfield, there's no way physically it is impossible for one of them to not be available at 4, because they have been tied to all 3 of those players as like their dude. So, if they really like Baker Mayfield, this report's coming out at a pretty convenient time for them. Oh, they happen to really like Baker Mayfield now. So teams are going to get scared. Teams, if someone really wants Baker Mayfield, they're going to maybe try and up their offer at number 2, which would absolutely play into Cleveland's benefit. So now that Cleveland has officially spread the field, and now they have officially on paper as saying that their guy is each one of the top quarterbacks, now the games begin.
I agree with you there. Now the games begin. But to Cleveland, based on your past history of successful number 1 overall, taking quarterbacks number 1, I don't think you take a quarterback at number 1.
No, absolutely. And
I think you take Saquon Barkley at number 1. Then the Giants trade back, and more I thought about it, I was like, Johnny Manziel didn't pan out. A lot of these number 1 overall quarterbacks didn't pan out. Look at what Myles Garrett did. He's a defensive end. Wasn't really a whole lot of pressure on him. Yeah, he was hampered with injuries this past year. Saquon Barkley. There's so many good quarterbacks. Lamar Jackson is even up there. I've heard him scramble quarterback and kind of play behind Tyrod, but I've also heard him having ties to New England. And I know they're picking 31st overall, so they could even jump up and give up. I don't think they'd give up Danny Amendola or Rob Gronkowski, but let's say they give up.
Well, they've got some picks, because when they traded Brandon Cooks, they now have the Rams pick. So they've got 2 first-rounders. They can use those plus future assets. If they want Josh Rosen, if they want Lamar Jackson, they can move up to do so. They just have to give up the farm.
But if you're New England, would you want to revamp your offense for Lamar Jackson? Based on Tom Brady's injuries with scrambling with the torn ACL, his hurt back, and now his age, would you want to risk your potential quarterback and moving up, or just kind of take him along the lines of in the low 20s, high 30s?
Well, from what I've seen, the big thing that Bill Belichick is thinking about right now is he's thinking about Deshaun Watson. And he saw what Deshaun Watson did to his defense this past season. And so some people are been on record saying that Bill Belichick might think Lamar Jackson is his guy. And that's why we've seen all these reports tying the Patriots to Lamar Jackson, because Lamar Jackson is a very similar mode to Deshaun Watson, except even faster. So that's why and I think Lamar Jackson is going to go easily top 15. I don't think he goes any lower than that.
You think he goes that high?
I think he goes top 15 now.
Who's he going to go to then?
It's someone who trades up is what I think. Either someone who trades up or Baltimore. I think Baltimore is the floor.
Joe Flacco. Yeah, I can see that. Joe Flacco's kind of getting up there.
Yeah, and they signed Robert Griffin III to be like sort of a mentor, which shows their willingness to sort of shift their system around. A lot of teams are really starting to get high up on Lamar Jackson. They're starting to realize what he's got, because people were saying he threw better than Teddy Bridgewater at his Louisville Pro Day, although Teddy Bridgewater had a notoriously bad Louisville Pro Day. But he runs a 4.3. He's got mobility, and he's the kind of guy that you can develop. If you can get him to sort of reel in the arm and tighten up his accuracy, he's gonna be the next Michael Vick. I mean, if this was any other draft and there weren't so many big name quarterbacks, he would easily be like a top 10 name no matter what. But because of the accuracy issues and all that stuff, he's fallen down a little bit. But now that everyone's talking quarterback, Lamar Jackson's name is going to keep pushing up. I don't think there's any way he's picked later than 20.
So do you think Lamar Jackson, because of what Deshaun Watson did last year, his minimal is like, I think he played 6 to 8 games, do you think that's getting Lamar Jackson going up because they saw what Deshaun Watson did coming out of college, and they're both kind of similar quarterback styles, But Lamar Jackson, as you said, is just faster.
Yeah. No, I think the reason that people are enamored with Lamar Jackson is they see his ability to really change the game. In that the NFL has really shifted into a style where everyone wants these big body quarterbacks with some mobility, but they're not blazingly fast, and they've got these big arms. Lamar Jackson is the antithesis to that. So the benefit that gives you in modern offensive styles, if you can get a player like that who is good enough to play the quarterback position, it really gives you a benefit against other teams because they have to prepare for a completely different style of quarterback. And I think that's really why Lamar Jackson is so intriguing, is because he's a different option. He is going to be available a little later. There's no way Lamar Jackson goes top 5. I just don't think he's not up there with those other guys.
Yes,
no.
he played in a strong conference, but I just don't think he has the arm.
No.
To play with Rosen.
No.
Darnold. Allen. I know he came from the Mountain West.
Yeah.
But that kid's got a rocket arm. He kind of reminds me a little bit of Carson Wentz. Because Craig Bowl, who's at Wyoming, recruited Carson Wentz to come here.
Yep.
And Brent Vigran, I think is the offensive coordinator over there, teamed up with Wentz. I just think that Allen reminds me a little bit of Wentz, and whoever gets him is going to get a franchise quarterback for the next 20-plus years. 20 years.
And that's what everyone's looking for, is they're looking for their franchise quarterback. But the reason that Lamar Jackson is going to be more in the 15 to 20 range is that it needs to be a team who's already got a quarterback right now who can take a good chunk of time to sort of fix his throwing mechanics and make him a better thrower to pair with his legs. And teams like Baltimore, teams like New England, they have that luxury. Teams like Cincinnati, it's teams like New Orleans. These are the teams that we see connected to Lamar Jackson, and I think they're going to be willing to maybe move up to get him to secure their franchise quarterback while they've still got an older, established quarterback that will eventually probably be faded out.
Well, you mentioned New Orleans. Who was that quarterback from BYU last year? I can't think of his name. I got drafted out of BYU. He plays special teams. They can kind of use him like
Hill?
Yeah. Jeremy Hill, I think.
Yeah.
Not
Jeremy. Like Terrence or something.
I don't know.
Yeah,
the quarterback got to be, you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
But they could kind of use him in those situations because he's so fast. Taysom Hill. He was able to block punts this past year. Lamar Jackson's way faster, and he looks way stronger than Taysom Hill. And maybe they switch Taysom Hill, the wide receiver, and bring in Lamar Jackson for a backup quarterback to back up Drew Brees.
Or honestly, they could have both. They could just have all three on the depth chart. It's possible, and then just still shift Taysom Hill around. But the thing with Lamar Jackson and the reason why he's starting to climb up draft boards as this year has gone on is that there are a bunch of coaches on record, the big name coaches are on record saying they really like what he's got. Sean Payton and Bill Belichick are the two guys who are advocating for him heavily, and that's why everyone else is starting to sort of see what they're talking about too. And so when you compare Lamar Jackson to really all these other quarterbacks, because his arm isn't there, no matter how fast he is, he's not going to be on the same level as Darnold, Allen, or Rosen, or Mayfield, but he's still really good. And I think with all of those other guys, they've all got their pros and cons. I think at least one, maybe two of them are going to be busts, and then the other two are likely going to be solid quarterbacks, at least in the league, if not great. But you can never know. That's the game people are playing.
It's like flipping a quarter and be like, who's the best quarterback?
And these NFL teams, this is what they're trying to figure out too. They're trying to figure out which one of these guys is going to be the best.
It's basically a gambling that an NFL doesn't even want to make legal. But when we come back, we'll be talking more about the defensive side, considering we spent most of these first 20 minutes talking about the offensive side. We're live here at Herd and Horns.
Conveniently located across the street from NDSU's campus, Herd and Horns is the place to go, whether you're looking for a fantastic meal or just a quick bite to eat.
Hi, welcome to Herd and Horns. Are you from Drink Fit Away?
With friendly staff and excellent service, it's a restaurant for all ages. Herd and Horns, your home for great food and Bison sports. Welcome to Bison Block. If you are an NDSU student, you know it well. It's located right across the street from campus. How would you like to live in the same building as Starbucks, Jimmy John's, and Herd & Horns? Bison Block offers high-quality apartments at a very affordable price. For more information, go to our website at bisonblockfargo.com to apply today.
Welcome back, everyone, to Herd and Horns, where this is X's and O's, and we are talking about the NFL draft. We just went extensively into the offensive side of the ball. Now we're going to talk about some of the defensive players. Now, Eric, not a lot of defensive players in the top 10, but it's sort of almost split half and half. Because everyone's talking about quarterbacks, all of the real high-quality defensive players are going to be available from 5 to 10. So looking at the players who are sort of being talked about there, which one do you think goes first outside of Bradley Chubb?
I think outside of Bradley Chubb, I think it's Minkah Fitzpatrick. I mean, he's pretty high out of Alabama. They won the national championship last year. He led the team in total tackles. But I think he goes for highest overall between that 5 and 10 range. I know a lot of people are high on Derwin James, the safety out of Florida State. He had an exceptional year considering how bad his team was. Yes, they lost their starting quarterback in the first game of the season to Alabama, but I think those two are the top two products, and everybody else, Tremaine Edwards, Josh Jackson, Denzel Ward, I think they all could fall between that 10 to 20 range.
Well, I definitely think there's once you get like past 15, the whole like flow of things starts to change. I think there's like a pretty, like, at least from what I've seen in mock drafts, there's a pretty set list of players who are going to go sort of in the range from 7 to 15. When really looking at the group that's sort of being talked about more is secondary players. This is still a passing league. Everyone's still looking for secondary players. So you mentioned Derwin James. There's also Denzel Ward, like you said, and then Minkah Fitzpatrick. Those are really the big three secondary players, and I've seen them going back to back to back in most drafts, starting with Tampa taking Derwin James, and even sometimes Minkah Fitzpatrick going at 6 or 5, or even sometimes falling down all the way to 11 with Miami. So really, when looking at the secondary players, which are sort of it's sort of right now being listed as like Bradley Chubb, everyone else, but there's the secondary players, then the defensive linemen, and then the linebackers fall somewhere in between on either other side. So which players, maybe not, or which group of players do you think is going to end up going first? Because a lot of people have these secondary players sort of grouped together, but there are also players like Vita Vea and Daron Payne who are slowly climbing up draft boards as well.
To me, I think the secondary goes first. It's a pass-happy league. Yeah, you can still get some great pass rushers later on in the second round, third round, and even till the 7th round, and even sometimes undrafted free agents and make the best players. You don't always need to take a defensive lineman with your number 1 overall pick in the draft, in the first round. To me, secondary, because you have the likes of Drew Brees throwing it around, Kirk Cousins now in the NFC North with Minnesota, playing in a dome, he's going to be able to sling it. He'll probably get 4,500 yards this year. Aaron Rodgers, Russell Wilson. You need people that can defend. Tom Brady, Tyrod, Drew Brees. I mean, there's so many great. Deshaun Watson now. You need people that can defend. Linemen, yeah, they mean something because they can still get sacks, but you need speed in the secondary, and you're going to get that right away in the draft with James, Fitzpatrick, Denzel Ward, and Josh Jackson, who had a pretty great game against Ohio State this year with the 3-interception game, and he continued that up. And to me, that game really boosted his draft stock because it was against J.T. Barrett and Ohio State, and they trounced Ohio State that game, and he was a big part of that.
Yep. And we see also in sort of that same range that there are a lot of teams that are needing a linebacker because once the secondary gets taken care of, because it is like you said, it is very likely that Fitzpatrick, James, they all sort of go in a row. But then you start to get into these teams that are kind of looking for a quarterback, but also desperately need a linebacker, and that starts with Oakland, who have Navarro Bowman. They had to bring him in because even despite his age, because they needed linebacker help. You have the 49ers, who now are very likely going to lose Reuben Foster, who was one of their first-round picks last year. And then you've got Miami, who will also need help at linebacker, and you've got the Bears, who are looking for help at linebacker. So really, when all these teams are looking for linebacker, and you've really only got 2 available, looking at the 2 options available, you see Roquan Smith, the senior from Georgia, who was a huge part of their run, really the leader of that defense, but he comes with some major injury concerns. And then you look at Terrell Edmonds, who from Virginia Tech, who has been sort of compared to Anthony Barr, and is sort of a younger, more pass-rushing focused player, but still inexperienced and might need some help. Which teams do you think are these 2 going to end up with, and which one would you take first?
To me, I think I would take Roquan Smith because he's more battle-tested. He played against the Alabamas, the Oklahomas, the Auburns, the LSUs. He played all these tough teams in the SEC. Tremaine Edwards, yeah, he played Clemson. So what? That's one tough team. That's one tough game he played against. The ACC to me is down, bottom. They're like the easiest league to play in the Power 5 conference. But to me, whoever comes first, to answer your question, I don't know who I'd take first. I think, I said Roquan Smith, but I don't know where they're going to fall, just due to the need of secondary. I've heard Tremaine Edwards tied to Green Bay, so he could, if he slides there, I know Green Bay would take him because they've had injury concerns with Clay Matthews, Nick Perry. They just got their first-round pick last week, and fourth-round pick from last year, Vince Beagle, back healthy now. So they need linebackers to fit into that brand new scheme of Mike Pettine, their new defensive coordinator. But I just don't know who's going to come off the board first. To me, I think it's Roquan Smith just because of the conference he played in, the Alabama. Like I said, Alabama's, Oklahoma's, and he has that experience. Yeah, he's a little inexperienced and needs a little more development. But so does everybody else coming out of this draft, except for the quarterbacks. They're pretty much, and some running backs. Everybody's pretty much well polished. Even Marcus Davenport, he's in there too at the DN spot. I wouldn't be surprised to see him go inside the top 10.
And really the thing with Roquan Smith with his injury concerns is that the people who are examining his injury concerns compare the situation very much to what Reuben Foster was dealing with last year, which caused him to slip down a little bit. But he was able to start playing as soon as the season began and was a big part of their defense. Before then, of course, sort of things unraveling. But now that I think we've sort of talked about defense adequately, well, let's sort of discuss the NFC North teams, the sort of regional teams, and what they're going to be doing. The Packers at 15, 14, and then the Vikings at 30. What do you think is in store for these 2 teams, or 2 regional teams, and what they're going to be looking to address, both having sort of interesting free agencies, getting big players like Jimmy Graham for the Packers and, of course, Kirk Cousins for the Vikings? What do you think these 2 teams are going to be looking at?
I think I can answer for Green Bay, you can answer for Minnesota, but okay. I think for Green Bay, I think they're going to look at secondary. They need some help in that secondary. Fitzpatrick, Derwin James, they would provide great help. Vita Vea, imagine him, Mike Clark, and Kenny Mike
Daniels.
I don't know why I said them both. Him, Kenny Clark, and Mike Daniels, all 3 bearing down on you as a quarterback.
Yeah.
With Vita Vea, that's a pretty scary defensive line right there.
Yep.
And that'd be one to fear in the NFC North. I know the Vikings have a pretty dang good pretty good D-line there over in Minnesota. But to me, I think the Packers are going to look secondary because they need that help. Yes, they drafted Josh Jones in the draft last year, kind of helped him out. They lost Kevin King early on in the season to injury. He basically shut down Antonio Brown, who most people won't consider one of the most dynamic wide receivers in the NFL. But I think the Packers, you got to go secondary because you need speed to shut down those the Kirk Cousins and the Matthew Staffords, and you can't get torn apart like you did last year.
Yep, I've seen them be projected. Jair Alexander out of Louisville, plenty. I've seen them sort of be in a different set of range. But, like you said with Vita Vea, if it does end up him, sort of one of the big pieces the Packers defense has been missing is that big demanding force in the middle that they lost when B.J. Raji retired, and that would sort of be
I miss
something.
B.J. Raji because he did the Raji in the NFC Championship game against the Bears. But that's a whole other story.
Yep. But it definitely could maybe replace that presence and give them sort of that inside force that they've been missing for a while. So now we'll sort of switch to the Vikings. Like you said, I guess I'll have a little bit of discussion about that. Really, the big thing is that they got Kirk Cousins. This is a pretty complete team. The only issue is that now they're sort of running out of cap space, so there's some positions that they need to fill that they can't really go out and sign another big free agent to sort of fill that mold. So what they're looking for is ready now players who can step into a position and help the cause right away. Now you sort of look at what they need. The two big positions to look at are going to be cornerback and offensive line. Cornerback because Terrence Newman hasn't officially retired yet, I don't believe. He's definitely not on the team right now, though. They haven't brought him back yet. So there's a hole at cornerback that sort of needs to be filled, which is one thing they could be looking at. UCF's Mike Hughes has been a name that I've seen repeatedly mocked to them down at 30, but you never know. It depends on how much they trust Mackenzie Alexander, because if they are ready for Mackenzie Alexander to pick up a bigger role, or they think one of these lower level free agents they picked up is going to be the one to step up and replace Terrence Newman, or they think Marcus Sherrills is going to be that one. But if they don't, and they really like a cornerback who's sort of in that range, what they'd likely do is maybe trade back into the beginning of the second round if they wanted to do that. And that honestly might be something they do either way. But more than likely, what they're going to do with that first pick, unless they trade back, is offensive line. The most interesting recent note that would go against those two positions was I saw the report today from a Twin Cities reporter that they're looking at South Dakota State's Dallas Goedert potentially, which is something that they would likely trade back into the beginning of the second round. That would be a player that they'd be looking for there, because they don't necessarily need a tight end right now with Kyle Rudolph still there, but they could use some depth as an extra threat there, and Dallas Goedert would definitely be someone who would give them that extra oomph.
You mentioned Dallas Goedert. It'd be kind of interesting to see him go to the Vikings because his favorite team is the Green Bay Packers, and he wants to play with Aaron Rodgers, but who knows where.
Yeah.
I mean, they're going to get Vikings if they draft him. They're going to get a great player either way. I mean, that guy dominated NDSU the past 2 years.
Yep, and they do the Vikings do their research on the regional players, which is really what brought them to him. So it's just an interesting thing. But really, the position to look at for the Vikings is going to be guard. You see, Joe Berger retired. You see they had some injury problems with Nick Easton going down. Jeremiah Searles, I believe they brought him back. No, I don't think they brought back Jeremiah Searles yet. He's still in restricted sort of limbo. But they were able to get Pat Elflein in the third round, which was a huge deal, coming in as their center, being one of the top rookies in the class, filling in that role. But now you sort of got these players like Nick Easton who have filled in. You've got Mike Remmers who could be switching in and out. But really they need an extra player in there, and there's plenty of options for them. Really the two most interesting ones would be Will Hernandez from UTEP, I think it is. It's either Texas El Paso or Texas San Antonio. Can't remember. But he's a big guard. He's 6'2", like 330. He's a massive guard, great run blocker, and has overwhelming power. He would be something that they don't really have in the status quo, and could really be something that adds to that as a plug. But the other really interesting name that a lot of people have brought up is Ohio State guard / center Billy Price. Sort of the same mold as Elflein, except even more highly touted. So he had an injury risk that happened earlier, that he tore his bicep while running in the pro day, but that's now been completely resolved, and they believe he'll be 100% healthy by training camp. So the benefit of that is that you get a player that's highly touted. You've got someone who can attest to him in Pat Elflein. You'd be pairing him up with a teammate, and he's a position of need. So it worked last year. Who's to say they don't try and go back to the well again? But the only problem with Billy Price is that it's likely that he might not be available. Will Hernandez will very likely be available in that range. So it depends on where the cards fall, but there's a lot of offensive linemen between, say, pick 25 and like the entire first half of the second round. So no matter what they do, if they're not specifically enamored with one super specific player, they may very well trade back, get some extra assets because they've only got like 4 or 5 picks in this year's draft. So they'd get some extra assets, trade back, and still get a player of need at a position of need who'd be ready to go right now. And the reason I think they will go offensive line over secondary is because they got Kirk Cousins as a free agent. You got to protect your quarterback.
So if you're the Vikings, do you go for a multi-utility offensive lineman who could play multiple different positions, or do you want one for each specific spot?
I think it depends on really what you're looking for. I mean, Mike Remmers, they hadn't really decided where they wanted him to fit in by the end of the year. He had played right tackle and guard, so it kind of depends on where they think he fits best. I think they will more than likely go for just a guard. So they don't need a center. They're just looking for someone who can play guard. And that's why Hernandez or Price makes sense, because although Price was a center, he could easily shift over to play a guard position. A lot of people have been projecting him as a guard because he also did play guard occasionally in a shift at Ohio State. And Will Hernandez was purely a guard at UTEP simply because of his size and being a little shorter. So that's why I think, they'll be looking for a guard specifically because that's the position they need with Joe Berger gone. But if the right player's there at tackle, like say they really like Colton Miller out of UCLA, or maybe for some weird reason Mike McGlinchey falls all the way down there, they could definitely take a tackle and move Mike Remmers inside if that's really what they feel would be best. Because Remmers can really play either inside or outside. But really the top prospects who are likely going to be there are all guards. So it just makes sense to fill the replacement hole with the player who's going to be there anyway.
So we mentioned, now we talked about the NFC North. Now let's dial it back even further. Let's talk about the NDSU product that most people are talking about, and we'll even throw in a South Dakota State guy in there if we already did. Nick DeLuca, where does he fall?
Man, I don't really know. I've seen him graded somewhere between 4th and 7th round. It really depends on what people see into him. I mean, one thing is that his initial pro day run was really slow. His 40 time was very slow, but his reactions, his reaction timings and his tangibles are really good. So it depends on how much teams will worry about how fast he is. I really think when you get into the later rounds of the draft, things completely blow up. There's no way to almost predict it. Like, there could easily be a team who really likes him in the 4th round, but there could be like people who, if every team is really concerned about his speed, he could go anywhere from 7th round to undrafted. You just don't know. It just depends on how teams have been thinking. I mean, he could be an option for the Vikings. I mean, since Greenway retired, I mean, they've got Kendricks, they've got Barr, and they've got Gideon and all that. But they could look for some extra depth there if they really like what he's bringing to the table. It's so hard to tell though, because when you get into those later rounds, it's such a crapshoot. Players who are like still on the board, who every year you see these players who are like 2nd or 3rd round picks on Kuiper's list. Sort of fall into these 5th to 7th rounds, and then sometimes they do end up being really good players. Like, those are the players that end up really good, like Christian Jones. Currently, he's not the Bears linebacker anymore. I think he signed with Miami, but he was one of those players who was thought to be like a 2nd or 3rd round pick, fell all the way to 7th, and then has become a regular NFL starter. So that's really what you end up looking at. And I think DeLuca could definitely be one of those guys that sort of could fall down, maybe get picked in the 5th to the 6th round, but then ends up finding some regular playing time because teams knew what he had. Maybe a lot of teams might think that other teams are scared of the speed, and they could use that to his advantage to get him a little bit later than normal and get maybe a steal in the draft.
I mean, I was at the end of his Super Day, I was able to attend that, and he ran faster than what he did at the Combine in Indianapolis, and his ball awareness skills are off the charts. I mean, that's one of the best linebackers for off the ball. I mean, yeah, he had to play against he played against a pass-heavy Missouri Valley Conference team. I mean, you had guys just slinging it. Taryn Christian, SDSU, slinging it all over the place. Chris Streveler, swinging it all over the place.
Yep.
The Sam Houston State quarterback, I can't think of his name off the top of my head. He was slinging it all around, trying to sling it all around in the FCS semifinals, but he is such a good ball hawk skills. And even even back behind him with Trey Dempsey, he was pretty darn good too. And I think Carson might be talking to the Eagles scouts and telling them, hey, this guy would be a steal if we could get him in like the 6th, 7th round.
Yep, and I think that's absolutely what it is. I think there's a team out there who notices what most NDSU fans know as a parent, is he's a really good player. He's a bit older than some players coming out of the draft, and he's got a couple injury concerns, but I think some team is going to find a lot of value in him, and that's why he could easily end up in that 5 to 6 range. I don't think he falls all the way to 7th. I think 5 to 6 is probably a good range for Nick DeLuca.
Now we'll talk about Dallas Goedert, SDSU. Kind of tore NDSU apart the past few years. I mean, where does he people are saying bottom of the 1st, early 2nd. But that couldn't mean. He could fall way down to the 4th, 5th round.
I don't think so. I think he will. I don't think he goes 1st round, because I think Marcel Hurst and Gelsinki from Penn State. I think those two go 1st. And then I think Goddard comes into play. There are a lot of teams in that range who are looking for tight ends. The Jets desperately need a tight end. They picked twice at the top of the 2nd round. Am I thinking about that right? No, they traded up. The Colts are the one that picked twice at the top of the 2nd round. What was I thinking about? I don't know what I was thinking about. But the Jaguars with their 1st round pick could easily pick a tight end. And I've seen Goddard projected to them, but I've also seen basically every other tight end projected to them. They were able to get Safarian Jenkins, but they could always use an extra tight end. And I think it's the same with Miami, who doesn't have a tight end right now. It's the same with New York Jets. So there's a lot of teams looking for their next tight end, and I think there's no way Goddard slips out of the 2nd round. That's the latest he goes. If the Jaguars or some team at the bottom of the 1st really likes Goddard, he could go in the 1st, but I think it's more than likely he falls somewhere in the 2nd round.
And he's more of like a Jimmy Graham kind of type tight end, where he can split out, play wide receiver, and also block. He was pretty good at that, because he had to be, because SDSU was a lot of run first football team in that past. But
yep.
I mean, I guess we'll just have to see when the NFL draft comes up on Thursday night.
Yep, but one more player before we go is another SDSU player, Jake Weineke, a wide receiver. Also seen him projected anywhere from early 3rd to late 4th. I think that's probably where he's going to end up going. But the last thing we're going to talk about here is sort of the special interest story of this NFL draft, the one-handed Shaquem Griffin, in that he had a stellar pro day. He is a great pass rusher. Where do you think he ends up falling? Because he's got a lot of talent, and I don't think a lot of teams are going to be that scared off by his hand situation, because he is a pass rusher. It would be different if he was, say, a cornerback or, of course, a wide receiver. I mean, there is a tight end who also has a similar problem in Troy Fumagalli from Wisconsin. Only a finger, though, but it's still something. But where do you think Shaquem Griffin ends up going? Do you think that he becomes an early round pick, or do you think that he becomes sort of a late round steal potentially, because his numbers are off the charts?
I think he's going to become. I think he can go from anywhere in the 2nd round to the 4th round. I don't think he gets to that 3rd day.
Okay.
I mean, there's a lot of teams that need linebackers, pass rushers, but he's so athletic. It's off the chart. His athletic skills are off the chart. I mean, try playing with one hand and catching the football and doing all this stuff and making plays like he does. I know he played in a weaker conference in the American Athletic Conference, but
they dominated.
They dominated that conference. I think the closest game was like 10 points.
Yep.
I mean, to me, a 2nd, 4th round.
Yep.
And somewhere in between there.
I think absolutely. I think he's a terror. He's got his numbers off the charts, and some team is going to get a really good value pass rusher out of Shaquem Griffin. Well, I think we've covered everything in the draft that there is to talk about. So thank you for watching this edition of X's and O's. Draft coming up Thursday. So we'll find out where all the cards fall then. I'm Jay Lenander.
And I'm Eric Bunnell.
Thank you for watching this edition of X's and O's, brought to you by Herd and Horns. We'll see you again next year. Maybe.
Yeah, next year.
Next year. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.
All right, we're good.